Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our favorite co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Dr. Paul, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. Well, they're still talking about what's going on with Trump and Putin.
Yeah.
We talked about them pretty intensely for 3 days, which was sort of unusual
record,
for us. But we're going to still talk about it to some degree, but indirectly, in the sense of how do the American people really responding? Are they as hysterical as the deep state is and the media and the politicians? Because there's a lot of people, I mean, they're ready to impeach the president, and you know, it's a big deal when you listen to that group of people. But Gallup just came out with this poll a couple of days ago, and they measured a lot of different things about what the American people really care about. And I was even a little bit surprised with this because they've been bombarded with Russiagate. It's been going on for a year, and all the terrible, terrible people that are involved and lining up the ducks. But it didn't register very high. Like 1% of the people cared about Russiagate, you know, and all this Putin stuff. So that's a bit of a surprise, but in a way, I think it's pretty good because they were a little bit upset with the politicians, and they're upset about immigration, which means that maybe Trump is winning this thing quietly rather than being demolished and looking like the worst guy in the world because he dared to talk to a dictator, you know, this sort of thing. So it's I think it's fascinating, but I think there's a lot of good information on this. Of course, this poll was released just a while ago.
Yesterday,
yeah, and we caught it on Zero Hedge, and they're up to speed on this stuff. So I think it's very important, little document, and I'm sure somebody will challenge and say, couldn't be right, you know, this sort of thing. But I think it's significant because it isn't a one-shot deal. This is something they do on a monthly basis, and it's systematically, and they can show trends on whether how much people are worried about immigration, how much people are worried about Russia invading us, you know, and that they're the ones who are causing all the trouble.
Yeah, and we have it is a monthly barometer. We have a tweet actually that sort of tees it up for us because this is David Sirota, who's a mainstream news person. Gallup recently did a poll of what Americans say is the most important problems facing the country. One finding, the percentage of Americans saying the situation in Russia is the most important problem is literally too small to represent with a number. And that actually we can expand on that picture beneath that with the next JPEG, if we can put it up. And if you're having trouble seeing it, that's because it's at the very, very bottom. You almost can't record it. At the top of the list is dissatisfaction with the government, poor leadership, and the issue of illegal immigration. These are at the top of the list of what Americans are worried about. So it just goes to show there is a huge chasm between the political class, Dr. Paul, the chattering class, the talking heads, the think tanks, and the rest of the country that's concerned about their livelihood, their jobs, the economy. And I think that's one of the things that candidate Trump tapped into when he was running. He tapped into it so well, and that was the key to his success. And I think that's why the Democrats are still running around with their hair on fire, because they can't understand their huge mistake of not being able to tap into the traditional ties to the working class.
Of course, in a way, we complain about this all the time, you know, that the average person on the street, they don't know where these countries are, they don't know where we're fighting and what they're doing, and they don't have a lot of interest. And so we try to get people's attention, but in a different sense of not to try to decide who should be impeached tomorrow and who's guilty of treason when it hardly has met the definition of treason. But it's something that people are very much involved in, and I think our job, of course, is to get information out. And this is a little bit different, but they do have their concerns. They are the ones who have to put up with daily living. And I think it's a challenge to the old saying, it's the economy, stupid. Yeah. But I looked around, and in some ways, you know, the economy has always has something to do with it. But all the economic statistics look pretty good right now. But there's also this subtleness. Why are people so angry and upset? What about this subtleness that the debt is overhanging and the pension funds are hanging out there? Most of the new jobs that are coming in right now, which are numerous, are part-time jobs. So I think the people are still very concerned because they don't like the leadership. I think they don't like the leadership because they're not satisfied with their lives. And of course, that's a big question mark on why aren't people satisfied? Why are people willing to go at each other? And it's been demonstrated in this attack on a president talking to another individual and turning it into something much bigger than the people. Just want to sort of turned off with it all. I think they're still thinking about corruption in government, believing in government. Maybe they don't buy into this because it's always lies that they have to listen to. And I think in a way there's some positive things. They're sick and tired of hearing that, and they're tired of the government. But I think what they visualize, what's going on with migration and immigration coming in. When you see San Francisco showing what's happening in the streets, that's something else. There must be some people in California that are unhappy too. They'd like to split California up a bit and try to survive one way or another.
Yeah, the silent majority maybe. But they've been told you have got to trust your government. You've got to trust your intelligence community. You've got to trust all of these government agencies. And I think instinctively they feel that experience tells them they can't trust them. They remember the Gulf War or the Iraq War wasn't that far away. And so I think that might be reflected in why problems with government, distrust of government is so high up there. People instinctively know that they're being lied to and they're frustrated about it. On the immigration, I wonder too, and we've talked a little bit before the show about this because it seemed to rank higher than worries about jobs and the economy. And I was trying to figure out what might that be. Maybe the two, I don't know, Dr. Ball, do you think maybe the two might be related? That they really are worried about the economy, but it's coming out with frustration over the idea that the problems are all to be blamed on illegal immigration? Yeah,
well, I think there's a lot of people, whether it's the immigrants and a problem and people being segregated into a very poor class or people moving from the middle class down, they actually don't get counted. When you look at the labor participation rate, there's no tremendous improvement there. So there's a lot of people not counted. The migrants aren't counted, even though there's some that would like to see them vote and things like this. That they're not counted, but the people see that as a burden, and they see it as a threat. I think a lot of people see this mess as a threat because the lack in trust, in spite of the wonderful statistics, because they say that the average person doesn't own a lot of stock. So if you see the stock market skyrocket, I see a bubble. Other people say, well, there's a healthy economy. But if the average person doesn't own very much stock and they know about debt, that there's a limit to how much debt you can have, and it looks like my pension funds are under threat, and then that causes a conflict, and sometimes it's easy to transfer that conflict into something like what was going on, this Russia-phobia, and they can go after Trump because he sets himself up with some of this stuff, and the argument goes and tone can get out of control. At the same time, it's amazing though, and we've talked about this, is how vigorous the enemies were of Trump that turned this into a treasonous act. And I think this would support the idea the people don't believe that baloney. Especially the supporters. That just locks those Trump supporters in stronger, and they're not having real discussions on the pros and cons of free trade, and balanced budgets and militarism and troops overseas and all these different things. But it's honed in, and the far left, the media and the coalition, the Republican and Democrat, decided that the most important thing in the world is to destroy Trump, and we'll do that by getting prepared. They prepared for this even before the meetings. They tried to get it canceled with those indictments, and that didn't work. So it's the conflict that we've been talking about for 3 days. I don't think it just sort of popped up because there was a real conflict. It's been manufactured, and right now it looks like their manufactured crisis just adds to the problems that we already had, and that is lacking confidence and trust. They don't believe the government, and that, of course, is a worthy notion. the intelligence community, that's what they're hysterical about,
Yeah.
because they want to be believable. They want to be in charge. And right now, they're losing credibility. And how many times now, even in spite of the control of the media, people have gotten the word out besides us. People point out, well, these characters that's been in the FBI and the CIA, they're not of high character. you
Yeah.
know. So I think that's good news.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's they're the resistors, the anti-Trump, the people that hate Trump. If they don't even know what his policies are, they don't follow us. They just hate no matter what he does. They hated him when he was bellicose toward North Korea. They hated him when he went and met with Kim. It doesn't matter. They don't realize that these things aren't sticking. There's a very narrow layer of political class, I think, in the resistance of the resistant types that are obsessed with this. But the vast majority of voters, the people who could turn the tide in the November midterms, they don't seem to be motivated by this. They don't seem to be inspired by it, as Gallup shows across the board. Stephen Kinzer, who we both are big fans of his writing, he's an historian and a great journalist. He tweeted out just a couple of minutes ago, can we stop using the word treason to describe any time a politician does something you disagree with? Can we just get this word out of here?
The point has been made, but it's been made many times, and we've made it. And that is, if this is treasonous, what about FDR? What about his consultation? Because there were stories back then that he sold out and delivered Eastern Europe to the Soviets and all this, and they sat down and met, and there was never that. So if they wanted to be consistent and say, well, this type of activity of Trump talking to Putin is a treasonous act, well, maybe we should, look to our guide on what treason is. What is treason? Oh, it's any time an American leader talks to a guy that we think is not perfect, and then they have to go back and then they have to go back and start taking down all of the monuments of FDR. Take down the monuments, because he was treasonous. By under their definition, he was much worse than Trump, when it comes to dealing and talking to bad people.
Yeah, that's true. He did indeed. And like the term racism, where it's overused has caused it to lose any meaning. I think we talk about this all week. It's the use of this bumper sticker, pounding it into your head, propaganda, to try to use it as a shortcut to motivate people, to get them excited about a word. And I think it's we've seen the overuse of that word from John Brennan's first tweet right after the press conference, treasonous meeting. And it goes on, and I think it does lose some of the sting,
Right. I think when I see people striking out like this wildly and not making sense, and people begging, hey, well, let's have a proper discourse on this, I think people are very frustrated because I see the big picture. The big picture to me is that we have a system that's deteriorating, and people know there's something wrong, and there's a cultural war going on. But I think we are at the end stages of a bad economic system, and intervention, and a debt-driven system, and a Federal Reserve printing money, and all this intervention overseas. But I think we also have developed a culture where the rich and the poor have very often been dependent on government. The poor have food stamps, the rich get supersized food stamp. And when they have an uncertainty about that, then they have to strike out in anger. But I think the one thing happens when they're totally dependent and not have control, or there are some problems, they don't have this sense of self-esteem. They don't have the sense of them taking care of themselves. They have a sense, I have to get a bigger lobbyist. I have to spend more money on lobbyists. And I just heard a statistic coming in on how much money the Republicans, not that the Democrats won't raise money too, how much money the Republicans are going to raise to maintain control. I mean, they're talking about billions and billions. I think like $500 billion that they think they have. So everything is the emphasis on the power of the politician that the American people don't trust, and they're I think pretty sick and tired of it. But this is the end stages and a reflection of a philosophy of government that's not workable. It's sort of like Mises predicted socialism can't work. I don't think the stuff we have, Mises argued that case too. This will fail because it leads to this type of a system, and then it leads to social conflict because in spite of the so-called prosperity, there's a contest and there is a contest on who's going to run the show. Yeah. And right now, you have to be a billionaire to even think about running for the presidency.
And you talk about these billions of dollars that are raised and spent. Where do they go? Well, they go to the elites. They go to the mainstream media for advertising. It all sort of circulates around the same group of people, and it's to maintain the status quo, no matter, as you always say, which party you're in. So it's sort of fascinating in that way. But the other thing that I was wondering about, because Zero Hedge kind of framed this in the framework of the midterm elections that are coming up in November, what does it mean that the so-called blue wave that the Democrats are hoping for in the fall is dependent on things like the Russia threat. Trump is treasonous. He's a traitor. We got to impeach him. What hopes do they have in November if they hinge everything on this and leave aside the things that obviously people do care most about? So they're missing the cues, I would say. That was what the poll means for the Democrats right now. What does it mean for the Republicans? I think it means they have to hold the economy. They have to hope the economy holds out. They hope no crash before November. Run on the economy. Things are doing well. People are worried about that. Back off on Russia. There are a lot of Republicans who would love to dive into this Russia is our enemy thing. They should back off that because people obviously aren't concerned about. And I think there's a lot of resonance in what President Trump said when he accused the Europeans of wanting us to defend them and not really taking care of themselves. I think a lot of Americans struggling financially, that is going to resonate with them. So if they listen to us, they may benefit.
Well, the problems that we have are real. And it seems to me, of course, that our arguments are very good arguments for freedom and for free markets and sound money and prosperity and peace. How can it go wrong? And even when we get an independent type president like Trump, how does he overcome all that? Because he does have really, really strong support. Something like Russiagate is going to drive his supporters even stronger. I don't think that's going to weed them off. But I think the biggest challenge that we have is, when we say something and we challenge whether it's Trump or the system or the Republicans or what people call Americans' ideals, which are usually wrong from their definition, that means war and occupation. They couch it in terms of patriotism. Yeah. And once you do that, then you can't say boo. And this coalition of Republicans and Democrats, that's essentially what they do. And it's boiled down to, if you don't say what we want and do what we want, you're committing treason. Like I've said before, truth is treason in an empire of liars. So this is, I think this whole patriotism is a thing, and super nationalism. In spite of all these other problems, they might say, yeah, we agree, but we are the greatest. But why can't we be great in promoting peace? Yeah. Why do we have to be great with $1 trillion military budget and then all this baloney that's going around that Russia is going to invade us, and they don't want to hear what we try to get out and others have tried to get out, is that we broke our promises. We're involved more than they are. And we promised in many ways that we wouldn't aggravate and antagonize Russia. NATO, yeah. And then we move it right up there. But patriots don't deal in that. Patriots aren't a lot of, self-examination. Because my argument has been the true patriot is willing to look at what our own government does. The government is not America. The government, unfortunately, is supposed to be very minimal. The people are supposed to establish what America is all about. But no, if it's up to the government, then people, if you challenge the government, then you're unpatriotic, and that I think is a negative. But maybe someday people will look at it differently. I think when the real opportunity comes is when these billions and now nearly trillions of dollars involved in lobbying and paying, supporting candidates and all this. When that becomes more difficult, then maybe they'll look for a much more limited form of government.
And I always feel a true patriot is one who's not afraid to change his mind, someone like Walter Jones.
Right.
When the facts don't comport with the previous view. I want to do a little something different, if you don't mind, Dr. Paul, with my conclusion, because I saw something just before the show that literally shocked me out of my seat. And I want to talk about it just for a minute or two in my conclusion. There's a JPEG I want to put up. This is Tim Weiner. He writes a lot about military and intelligence issues. He says in a new Reuters op-ed, Trump has attacked the intel agencies. Expect them to strike back. He talks about the foundations of American national security are under assault. The battle lines are drawn. On one side is the FBI, the CIA, the NSA. On the other, the commander-in-chief. And you think that he'd be writing this saying this is dangerous, we can't have these. No, he thinks it's great, actually. You want to talk about what's subversive. You want to talk about a real threat to the United States. I'm going to read a couple of quotes from what he wrote. And I couldn't believe when I read the title, I thought there's no way he's going there. He went there. He basically says the intelligence community has got to take this president out. He said Trump's performance at Helsinki was a subversive act. He later said he rejected the conclusions of the intelligence community. That's why it was subversive. He said, quote, but the U.S. intelligence community has the power to strike back. Even paranoids have enemies, and Trump has made real enemies in the realm of American national security. He has struck blows against their empire, and one way or another, the empire will strike back. It wasn't a warning. If you read the piece, he was welcoming it. He's welcoming it. So you talk about subversion. That is chilling.
Yeah, that's incitement. That comes a lot closer to being a treasonist motivation than what they're using. But no, that is very dangerous. You know, and they always bring up this subject that Putin has something on Trump. I think that's nonsense, to tell you the truth. Hey, we have something on Trump, and that's why he has to bow and and capitulate to Putin and you know, put up with all this nonsense. But you know what? It's conceivable that Trump is very much aware of this and doesn't see it the way this guy sees it, because we've talked about it and people know history now. I mean, even like, say, the Kennedy assassination, you know, I remember that so clearly, but it was just everybody coming together. One guy shot our president, shouldn't have done it. Now, 80% of the American people do not believe the panel.
Yeah.
So that means that involved the CIA and our government officials. So, and that isn't the first time. I mean, Martin Luther King has been charged that our government dealt with him. Probably Bobby Kennedy's been in charge. It's been going on for a long time. And if you look at all the people around the world, it's our security agencies. And I think they're threatened, and that's why they're getting so aggressive now. They're declaring their boss. And I think that is probably something that Trump has to balance. Well, I think he just needs more guards because they cannot be pacified. I mean, if they would have been pacified, Trump is independent, but he spent all the money they wanted and raised them more for the military-industrial complex. The establishment didn't want him to be friends with Iran, and he's very strongly anti-Iran. But that hasn't pacified the people. They figured, oh, we can work him over. So I think that is a problem. What you read is very significant, and let's hope you know, people wake up. I think all these problems, whether it's economic or foreign policy, it's a consequence of the fact that we follow interventionism when we should be minding our own business, protecting our people and protecting the liberties of American people at home, to allow the release of creative energy and a willingness to get along with people regardless of other people's imperfections and work on our own. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.